Welcome the anointed ones. Some people don't realize when you play mind games with an awakened soul, you're actually signing up for therapy you didn't consent to. Let that sink in, because this is not just another story about manipulation or power struggles. This is a story about how the player got played by their own reflection. Psychologists say the average person makes over 35,000 decisions a day, most of them unconscious. But what happens when someone tries to hack those decisions? When they think they can twist your emotions, rearrange your thoughts, and bend your will like a chess piece? Well, that might work on ordinary minds, but not on a conscious one. See, when you're chosen, your mind doesn't just think, it feels frequencies. You don't react to what people say, you respond to what they intend. That's why the so-called mind game master never stood a chance. They came with manipulation, but you came with meditation. They wanted to scramble your peace, but you turned their confusion into a counseling session. You weren't fighting for control, you were offering correction. And here's where it gets hilariously divine. While they were plotting psychological warfare, you were performing spiritual surgery. You didn't just beat them at their own game, you rewrote the rulebook mid-match. What they called a strategy session turned into a soul session. They walked in thinking they were about to break a mind. They walked out wondering why they suddenly wanted to journal, cry, and apologize to everyone they've ever ghosted. Because that's what happens when a manipulator meets a healer disguised as intelligence. The game stops being a game and starts becoming a mirror. Welcome to chosen ones. They brought in a mind game master. But you turned it into healing and won their soul. Now sit back, because this one will make you rethink every battle you thought you needed to win. Number one, they came to study you, but you became their mirror. That's where the game ended before it even started, because people who specialize in manipulation depend on your confusion to stay in control. They expect you to chase approval, over-explain, or try to prove your worth. But when they met you, none of those tactics worked. You didn't react, you reflected. Every move they made exposed something about themselves that they weren't ready to face. You became the evidence of their own behavior. They tried to decode your psychology, but instead they got a front-row seat to their own dysfunction. Your calmness didn't frustrate them. It terrified them, because in the silence of your awareness, their own noise became deafening. They started to see that their need to control people came from the same insecurity they've been running from all their life. You didn't have to teach or preach. Your energy did the teaching. The more they tried to get you, the more they got lost in their own reflection. It's unsettling for people who build power through confusion to meet someone who thrives in clarity. They realized they couldn't manipulate a person who doesn't need external validation to feel secure. You became a mirror so clean that their pretenses couldn't survive their own gaze. They wanted to find your weakness, but you kept showing them theirs. Every time they tried to make you doubt yourself, you responded with quiet truth that didn't need defense. That's when the power dynamic flipped, without a word, without a war. You see, mirrors don't fight, they reveal. And that's what broke them open. Because when manipulation meets consciousness, exposure is inevitable. They thought they were pulling strings, but all they did was pull back the curtain on their own shadow. It's easy to play games with people who need attention, but it's impossible to control someone who has made peace with solitude. They came to analyze your mind, but left realizing they never understood their own. By the time they realized what happened, the game had turned into therapy. You didn't destroy them, you awakened them. You made them see themselves in ways they had avoided for years. They came to conquer your peace, but instead, your peace conquered their illusion. And that's what real mastery looks like. Number 2. Their game was built on trauma, but you played from wholeness. That's why nothing they did could truly get under your skin. They were operating from wounds that never healed, the need to feel in control, the fear of being powerless, the obsession with outsmarting everyone before anyone could hurt them first. That's not intelligence. That's survival, masquerading as strategy. They mistook trauma responses for brilliance, and then they met you, someone who no longer needed chaos to feel alive. You didn't fight them on their level because you didn't carry the same fractures they did. They kept trying to provoke you into the same emotional battlefield that had worked on others, but you were grounded in peace they couldn't manipulate. You weren't trying to win, you were trying to stay aligned. That alone broke every rule they played by. Manipulators depend on emotional turbulence. They need a reaction to measure their influence, but you gave them nothing they could feed on. You moved differently because your peace wasn't performance. It was power. They couldn't compute that kind of strength. They were used to people mistaking loud confidence for control, but you operated in a quiet authority that couldn't be provoked. You didn't just outsmart them, you out-healed them. And that's a kind of intelligence no tactic can compete with. While they were trying to make you question yourself, you were quietly observing the pain behind their behavior. You saw through the act and recognized the trauma script playing out in real time. You realized they weren't evil, just broken in ways they didn't even understand. That's the real reason you won. You didn't play to destroy, you played to understand. You disarmed the entire game by refusing to participate in the emotional manipulation that powered it. You didn't match their anger, you neutralized it. You didn't absorb their projections, you reflected truth back at them. It's what happens when someone healed meets someone still performing from pain. The healed one becomes the reset point. You made them realize that peace is not passivity. It's clarity. You showed them that control built on trauma collapses in the presence of someone who's already free. And for the first time, they saw that the real game wasn't between you and them. It was between who they pretended to be and who they truly were. Number 3, they wanted control, you offered consciousness. That's where the tables quietly turned. Control is rooted in fear, in the belief that if you can manage someone else's mind, you can escape your own. Consciousness, on the other hand, doesn't chase security. It is security. They tried to dominate you through confusion, manipulation, and psychological tension, but you didn't play along because you weren't seeking validation or trying to win. You were aware, and awareness doesn't panic, it just observes. That unnerved them more than any resistance ever could. They mistook your calm for weakness, not realizing it was precision. Every move they made to test your reactions failed because you weren't reacting, you were perceiving. They were performing power plays from ego, while you were functioning from spirit. Their entire identity depended on controlling outcomes, but you had nothing to prove. That's what they couldn't grasp. You weren't attached to control, so they couldn't control you. You were anchored in something they didn't understand. Self-mastery. Their control tactics thrived on emotional chaos, but your consciousness was like clean air in a smoky room. You saw every attempt before it landed, and you understood the why behind it. You knew they weren't trying to dominate you just for fun. They were trying to protect the fragile parts of themselves that felt small when faced with someone who didn't need to perform. You understood their manipulation wasn't power. It was panic wearing sophistication. And that's what changed everything. Instead of attacking back, you gave them awareness. You didn't humiliate them. You revealed them, not through confrontation, but through presence. They started to feel their own behavior reflected back in real time. The game became uncomfortable because consciousness doesn't play fair. It plays true. And truth has a way of breaking people open. You didn't defeat them, you woke them up. In the end, they learned something their ego never prepared them for. Control collapses in the presence of real awareness, because when someone operates from spirit, you can't threaten them, confuse them, or redirect them. They see through it all. And that's what left the so-called mind game master powerless. You didn't overpower them. You overlit them. Your consciousness became the mirror that stripped their illusions bare. And that was the real victory. Number 4, you transmuted their manipulation into revelation. And that was the turning point. While they were busy trying to twist your emotions, you were quietly transforming the entire atmosphere. You didn't absorb their darkness, you translated it. They threw projection, gaslighting, and silent sabotage, but instead of drowning in it, you let it expose the truth of who they really were. Your steadiness became a kind of mirror that decoded their intentions. Every tactic they used became evidence of their inner state, and you handled it with such composure that they had no choice but to face their own reflection. The reason their manipulation couldn't destroy you is because you didn't resist it. You transmuted it. You didn't fight their energy. You purified it through understanding. While they tried to provoke, you observed patterns. You watched them repeat the same emotional games, thinking they were controlling you, not realizing you were studying the structure of their pain. And through that awareness, you converted their poison into wisdom. You learned how fear speaks through control, how insecurity disguises itself as arrogance, and how people try to dominate what they secretly admire. You didn't retaliate because you knew energy moves like currency. What you give, you receive. So you didn't return manipulation with hostility. You returned it with higher vibration. That's why they left those encounters feeling disoriented. They came to drain you, but somehow they left lighter. They didn't know why. They didn't realize you were performing spiritual alchemy in real time, turning tension into teaching, deception into discovery. The beauty of your response was that it didn't seek revenge, it sought revelation. You let the truth unfold naturally without forcing it. Your calm presence became the light that exposed every shadowy intention. You made them realize they weren't battling you. They were battling their own hidden motives. What they called strategy became confession in your energy. By the time it was over, they didn't just lose. They understood. They saw their behavior with clarity for the first time. You didn't punish them. You enlightened them. That's the real mastery of the chosen ones, to take what was meant to corrupt them and use it to cleanse the entire interaction. You didn't win by fighting. You won by elevating. Number 5, you weren't playing chess. You were reprogramming energy. They thought they were engaging in a mental duel, a battle of logic and manipulation, but you were operating on a completely different frequency. They were moving pawns on a board while you were rewriting the entire operating system that powered the board itself. Their strategies were built on intellect, but yours came from energetic intelligence, the kind that doesn't need to prove, plan, or predict. You weren't trying to win a conversation, you were correcting a vibration. They thought they were planting confusion, but you were neutralizing chaos at its source. Every time they tried to corner you emotionally, your calm presence disrupted the pattern. You weren't just responding to words, you were tuning into the energetic signature behind them. You could feel when their intentions didn't match their tone, when manipulation hid behind politeness, when control disguised itself as concern. and instead of reacting to it, you recoded it. Your awareness restructured the entire interaction without a single confrontation. That's the part they didn't understand. You weren't strategizing, you were harmonizing. You could sense when the atmosphere shifted into tension, and your very energy started restoring balance. That's why their tricks stopped working. You didn't have to expose them. The vibration of truth in you made dishonesty short-circuit on its own. You became the silent reset that forced everything around you to align or fall away. When you operate on that level, you stop fighting the behavior and start correcting the frequency behind it. You understood that manipulation can't survive in environments of integrity, so you embodied integrity until their energy had no choice but to reveal itself. That's not a game. That's spiritual technology in motion. You didn't fight their darkness with light. You simply turned on so much light that their darkness lost form. And in the end, they couldn't even explain what happened. They thought they were dealing with a mind, but they were up against a field, one calibrated for truth. They were trying to outthink you, but you were out-vibrating them. Every time they moved with calculation, you moved with alignment. That's why you didn't just win. You reset the entire playing field. Number 6. They wanted to humble you, but you humbled their darkness. They approached you thinking they could break your composure, bait your ego, or make you prove your worth. They were hoping to meet resistance, someone defensive, reactive, or desperate to be understood. Instead, they found stillness. You didn't need to defend yourself because truth doesn't argue. You let them underestimate you, and that was their undoing. The humility they mistook for weakness became the very force that revealed their fraud. They wanted to see how far they could push you before you cracked, but your piece had no pressure point. Every insult, every subtle provocation, every test they sent your way bounced off the quiet confidence you carried. That kind of power isn't loud or dramatic. It's anchored. You didn't meet arrogance with attitude. You met it with awareness. You understood that people who need to dominate are already dominated by fear. Their need to win was just a cover for their need to feel worthy. So, while they came to expose you, they ended up exposing themselves. True humility is dangerous to manipulation because it removes the tension ego feeds on. When you don't need to be right, you can't be controlled. When you don't chase validation, no one can use it to move you. That's what confused them, how someone could have that much strength without performing superiority. You didn't fight back, yet somehow you still won. You didn't clap back, yet somehow they lost their confidence mid-sentence. Your presence stripped away the illusion that power must always overpower. You showed them that the highest level of control is self-control. By the time it was over, you hadn't raised your voice once, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. They walked in ready to humble you, but they left humbled by what they witnessed. Calm authority that couldn't be provoked, and compassion that couldn't be faked. You didn't destroy their darkness. You exposed it by refusing to mirror it. You turned what they thought was a test into a revelation. And through that, you taught them something they never learned from all their so-called mastery. Real power doesn't need to crush anyone. It just stands so firmly in truth that everything false collapses on its own. Number 7. You read their intent before they spoke it, and that's what left them unnerved. You weren't relying on logic alone. Your awareness operated beyond the surface level. Words never fooled you because you could sense the emotional vibration underneath them. You knew when something was off, even when everything looked polite. That's what made you untouchable. Your intuition was fluent in the language of energy. You could sense manipulation forming before it even took shape. While they were still thinking about their next move, you had already decoded the motive behind it. They were used to people reacting to tone, expressions, or clever persuasion. But with you, all that performance fell flat. You weren't reading behavior, you were reading intention. You could feel the distortion in their field, the slight dip in energy that always reveals when someone's pretending. It's not magic, it's alignment. When your spirit is clear, dishonesty feels like static in the air. You simply knew what wasn't authentic. That's why their tricks, however calculated, never landed. You were always 2 layers deeper than the conversation. They thought you were quiet because you didn't know what was going on, but you were quiet because you already knew. That's what rattled them the most. You didn't need to expose them. Your calm awareness did. You let them talk, plan, and posture, but you could see the cracks in their intentions widening with every word. And because you didn't react, their manipulation had nowhere to attach. They were trying to trap your emotions, but your discernment kept you anchored. This kind of perception isn't about paranoia. It's about presence. When you're grounded in truth, you can sense anything that vibrates against it. That's why they couldn't understand how you saw right through them without any evidence. You were decoding energy while they were busy crafting narratives. They were playing chess. You were observing the entire board from above. By the time they realized what was happening, they had already exposed themselves. You didn't have to prove anything. Your awareness dismantled their strategy before it even began. They came expecting a predictable reaction, but your discernment rewrote the entire script. You weren't on their board because you were never in their game. You were operating from a higher dimension of truth they couldn't access. Number 8. You didn't counterattack. You created inner reflection. That was your quiet genius. While they came ready for battle, armed with manipulation and rehearsed arguments, you offered something far more disarming: authenticity. You didn't react, you revealed. You let your calm honesty stand on its own, and it did what no form of aggression ever could. It turned the mirror toward them. They expected resistance, but what they got was truth, and truth has a way of stripping away the armor people hide behind. You understood something they didn't. Reacting feeds the game, but reflection ends it. Instead of arguing to be understood, you embodied understanding itself. You didn't fight to prove who you were. You stayed grounded in who you are. That's what shook them. Because when someone is determined to project their confusion onto you, nothing confuses them more than meeting a person who refuses to participate. Your authenticity made their manipulation visible. It exposed the gaps between their words and their intentions. They started hearing themselves in ways they never had before. Every time they tried to provoke you, they ended up confronting their own behavior. That's what true integrity does. It silently exposes what cannot coexist with it. You didn't need to raise your voice. Your peace raised the vibration of the entire situation. Your lack of reaction forced them to sit with emotions they'd spent years avoiding. Guilt, insecurity, shame, envy. You didn't punish them. You let them face themselves. That's a far deeper consequence than any argument could deliver. The irony is, they thought you were weak for not fighting back. They didn't realize that self-restraint takes more power than retaliation ever could. It takes strength to stay centered when someone's trying to pull you into chaos. It takes mastery to let truth do the talking while you remain still. Your silence wasn't avoidance. It was authority. It was the kind that says, "I don't need to win this." You need to see this. In the end, you didn't defeat them. You revealed them to themselves. They weren't expecting that kind of exposure. You didn't destroy their ego, you made it visible. And once someone sees their own reflection in truth, the illusion can never control them again. Number 9. Their tactics were built on ego. Yours came from spirit. That's why they could never truly win. Everything they did was motivated by a need to prove superiority, to be seen as the smartest, the most in control, the one who always had the upper hand. Ego thrives on hierarchy. It needs someone to be beneath it to feel important. But spirit doesn't compete. Spirit elevates. You weren't seeking to dominate, you were seeking to understand. And that's what dismantled their entire strategy. They mistook your compassion for naivety because they didn't realize empathy can be just as sharp as intellect. Sharper, even. Where their ego played games, your spirit saw through them. You didn't respond to their manipulation with equal force. You responded with insight. You could see the emotional hunger behind their control, the fear hiding under their confidence. Your presence became the kind of mirror that doesn't just expose lies. It heals the reason those lies were created in the first place. They thought you were soft, but you were simply tuned into a higher intelligence that doesn't need to harm to correct. Their ego wanted to win the argument. Your spirit wanted to win the soul. You didn't meet pressure with pressure, you created release. You let the energy settle, not because you were avoiding the conflict, but because you were redirecting it toward clarity. Every time they tried to corner you, you brought the conversation back to truth. You shifted the vibration from control to awareness without forcing it. That's why they started stumbling over their own manipulation. They were being recalibrated in real time. Ego operates through fear, but spirit operates through resonance. You didn't need to threaten them to make them change. Your energy did that naturally. They started to realize that your stillness carried more authority than their dominance. That's when the power dynamic shifted, not because you fought harder, but because you stood higher. You didn't break them. You broke the illusion they were hiding behind. By the end, they didn't just lose. They learned. They learned that intellect without compassion becomes manipulation. They learned that control without consciousness collapses. And most importantly, they learned that true strength never comes from ego. It comes from spirit, quietly restoring everything ego tried to destroy. Number 10. You became their emotional mirror, not their opponent. That's where the whole dynamic shifted. They came prepared for resistance, for someone to match their manipulation with defensiveness. They were ready for a fight, but you didn't give them one. You understood that people only try to control what they're afraid to lose. Instead of reacting to their tactics, you looked deeper. You asked yourself, what kind of pain would make someone need that much control in the first place? That's what changed everything. You stopped trying to be understood and began to understand them. Your empathy didn't make you vulnerable. It made you powerful. You could see straight through the act, the inflated confidence, the mind games, the arrogance. All of it was camouflage for fear. You saw the scared child underneath the manipulator, the part of them that never learned how to connect without controlling. Most people would have taken offense, but you took insight. You understood that they weren't attacking you. They were defending their own emotional wounds. That level of awareness takes strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need revenge to feel validated. By refusing to dehumanize them, you did something they weren't prepared for. You made them feel seen, and that's what broke their control. Manipulation thrives in misunderstanding. But when you bring empathy into the mix, it loses oxygen. You didn't excuse their behavior, but you also didn't reduce them to it. You reflected their pain back with clarity, not cruelty. You gave them an emotional mirror instead of a battlefield, and that's when the truth started to surface. They began to sense that their usual tricks couldn't survive around you. The mask didn't fit anymore. That's what true healing looks like, when a person can no longer hide from themselves. You weren't preaching or punishing, you were simply being real. Your calmness made them confront emotions they had buried for years: shame, guilt, fear of rejection. You didn't force that reflection. Your authenticity created it. They expected you to fight, but you disarmed them by understanding them. That was both their healing and their defeat. Because once someone sees themselves clearly, manipulation becomes impossible. You didn't just win the battle. You dissolved it entirely by turning their aggression into awakening. Number 11. You forced them to taste their own medicine, but you sweetened it with grace. You didn't give them what they gave you, you gave them what they needed to see. They threw bitterness at you, and instead of spitting it back, you turned it into clarity. That's the kind of strength that doesn't scream, it teaches. They were ready for a war, but what they got instead was revelation. You didn't fight them on their level. You made them realize what it feels like to encounter someone who refuses to mirror toxicity and instead transmutes it into light. That's why they couldn't make sense of you. You responded like someone who had already won before the conflict even began. Grace was your weapon, but not in a way they expected. You didn't humiliate them. You educated their spirit. You didn't mock them. You let their actions echo back with precision. Every attempt to hurt you only exposed their own emotional immaturity. You didn't even have to say much. Your peace spoke louder than any clapback ever could. And the irony is, the very grace that confused them also convicted them. Because grace has a strange way of showing people what guilt looks like in the mirror. They wanted to see you crumble. Instead, you became proof that power doesn't have to punish. It can heal. You didn't forgive them because you were weak. You forgave them because you refused to let bitterness reprogram your heart. That's what they couldn't comprehend. How you could know the full extent of their betrayal and still choose compassion without losing discernment. You weren't blind to their darkness. You just refused to feed it. The most poetic part. You made them experience their own energy, but through you, it was purified. You didn't become them to defeat them. You became higher than the version of them that tried to break you. And that's what burned their ego the most. They realized too late that your kindness wasn't naivety. It was mastery. You didn't just turn the other cheek. You turned the entire situation into a spiritual classroom. Grace wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And through it, you didn't just win the battle. You raised the vibration of the entire war. Number 12. They played games with the mind, but you played with frequency. They thought they were pulling emotional strings, but you were tuning spiritual instruments. While they were busy manipulating thoughts, you were shifting energy. They wanted to dominate perception. You wanted to restore balance. And the moment they tried to drag you into mental chaos, your vibration adjusted the entire atmosphere. You weren't arguing. You were recalibrating. That's why their tactics didn't work. They were trying to control a narrative, but you were harmonizing a field. Your calm wasn't passive. It was frequency management. Each silence, each breath, each subtle redirection was a form of energetic coding. You were teaching them without saying a word that control is not power. Coherence is. They tried to outthink you, but you weren't even thinking on the same bandwidth. You were listening for vibration, not vocabulary. You could feel when someone's tone carried manipulation, and instead of matching that energy, you transmuted it. That's why they kept walking away, confused, drained, or even convicted. You didn't attack their ego. You neutralized its signal. You operated like spiritual software in a world running on outdated emotional code. Every attempt to play you actually triggered your system's upgrade. You didn't win through cleverness. You won through calibration. Your energy stayed unbothered because it wasn't fighting flesh and blood. It was balancing frequency and truth. That's what they never saw coming. They thought you were being still because you were unsure. But in reality, you were stabilizing the energetic field they were disturbing. And the beauty of it all? They left the interaction feeling lighter without knowing why. Their manipulation short-circuited because your energy didn't give it a host. You rewired them, not through confrontation, but through resonance. You were the higher vibration that turned their mind games into a moment of spiritual maintenance. They thought they were in control, but you were actually conducting the entire symphony. That's not submission. That's mastery. You didn't outsmart them. You out-frequencied them. Number 13, their intention was to break you, but you became their awakening. They came with an agenda, armed with tactics meant to shatter your confidence, twist your emotions, and make you question your own peace. But they didn't realize that when light meets manipulation, something far deeper happens. The energy they aimed to destabilize became the very energy that exposed their inner fractures. Your stillness, your balance, your refusal to play into their chaos reflected something back to them that no confrontation ever could. Truth. You didn't absorb their darkness. You illuminated it. And when truth stands still long enough, even the deceiver begins to see their own reflection. They expected resistance, but what they encountered was resonance. Your energy didn't fight, it revealed. The mind game master wasn't ready to meet someone who didn't react, compete, or defend, but simply was. That unshakable presence stripped away their illusions. Their own tactics started to feel heavy, unnatural, and exhausting in your atmosphere. That's because your energy wasn't playing by human rules. It was running on spiritual law. Where they operated through manipulation, you operated through divine neutrality. That neutrality forced them to see that all their strategies were coping mechanisms, attempts to control what they never learned to heal. You didn't destroy them, and you didn't need to. What actually happened was deeper. You detoxed their energy field. The same vibration they tried to infect you with ended up confronting them. They were suddenly face to face with their own projections, realizing that their power was rooted in fear. Your peace acted like an intervention from the universe, uninvited yet necessary. And in that confrontation with truth, something inside them cracked open. What they called a game became their mirror. You didn't play to win, you played to awaken. You were never there to prove superiority. You were there to trigger transformation. That's why, even in defeat, something in them softened. They saw, maybe for the first time, that domination is not strength, and that peace is not passivity. It's divine authority. You weren't their opponent. You were their awakening. And that's a kind of victory they'll never forget. Number 14. They walked in as a manipulator, but they left as a student. They thought they were entering a mental battlefield where wit and control would decide the outcome. What they didn't expect was to walk straight into a field of awareness that made their tricks look small. They were used to people folding, reacting, or playing along with their manipulation, but you didn't do any of that. You didn't resist. You reflected. You didn't argue. You observed. Your calmness became the chalkboard on which their own behavior was written back to them. And before they knew it, the one who came to teach was being taught. You didn't defeat them in the way they understood victory. You redefined it. Because the real win wasn't you overpowering them. It was them awakening to something greater than power. They came trying to dominate your mind, but they ended up encountering a level of consciousness that made control irrelevant. Your presence made their manipulation look childish, not because you humiliated them, but because you showed them how unnecessary it all was. You didn't just win their respect, you cracked open their awareness. You made them question why they needed to control people in the first place, and that's the shift they never saw coming. The manipulator became the student because your energy didn't match their chaos. It transcended it. You taught through vibration, not vocabulary. You didn't give them revenge, you gave them revelation. Every calm response, every boundary you held without bitterness, every truth you spoke without aggression, became a silent sermon. You showed them that intelligence without empathy is self-destruction, and that manipulation is just unhealed fear wearing confidence as a disguise. By the time they left, something in them had changed. They might not have admitted it, but they felt it. They tasted peace, not submission, not defeat, but peace, and realized how foreign yet freeing it was. They came to win a game of minds, but found themselves disarmed by a heart that couldn't be fooled. You didn't just protect your spirit, you educated theirs. They walked in as a manipulator, confident in their tricks, but they left as a student, humbled, awakened, and forever marked by the quiet intelligence of your soul. What all of this shows is that being chosen isn't about winning battles in the way the world defines victory. It's not about proving your intelligence, outmaneuvering someone, or showing who is stronger. Being chosen is about transcending the games, the chaos, and the manipulation, and operating from a place of consciousness so deep that it rewrites the rules without a single fight. You didn't just survive their tactics, you transformed every attempt to break you into a lesson, a mirror, a doorway for awakening. Every strategy, every manipulation, every carefully calculated move they brought to the table became an opportunity for you to elevate not only yourself, but the very energy around you. They came with the intention to dominate your mind, but what they encountered was something entirely different: presence. They came expecting a battle, but what they found was awareness. They came prepared to bend you, but instead they were being reflected, corrected, and even healed. Your calmness, humility, empathy, and integrity didn't just protect you, they revealed the truth in them that they had avoided for years. They thought they were in control, but you were orchestrating on a higher plane. Every move they made became a lesson for them. Every attempt to confuse became a spark of clarity, and every strategy intended to harm became the pathway to transformation. This isn't just a story about one confrontation. It's a blueprint for how those who are truly awakened operate. You proved that real strength doesn't rely on arrogance, retaliation, or domination. Real power comes from understanding, from holding space for truth, from seeing what lies behind fear and responding with wisdom and grace. You didn't just win in the ordinary sense, you rewrote the outcome of the encounter entirely. You didn't just survive, you elevated. You didn't just respond, you transformed. And in doing so, you showed that the highest mastery isn't defeating others, it's awakening them while standing firmly in your own light. So if this message resonated with you, if you felt the power of awareness, the energy of presence, or the truth in these words, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, experiences, or awakenings, and share this with someone who needs to see how true strength and consciousness operate in a world full of manipulation. The more we elevate, the more we inspire others to step into their own power. This is your moment to witness mastery in action and to carry its lessons forward in your own life. God bless you.